Welcome to Mindfully Integrative Podcast with your host, Dr. Damaris G. Mindfully Integrative is a podcast discussing ways toward mindfully incorporating integrative health into our lives. This podcast will have informative resources, fun topics, interviews, and discussions relatable for today with a true mindful perspective in a mind-body, holistic life approach.
Hi, how are you? This is Damaris Grossman, and I'm talking about in this lesson in reference to getting your metabolic health so that it's optimal, so that you will have a GLP-1 secretions, you will have quality metabolic health, and it'll be optimized, and to keep it sustainable. Now, what are those metrics that when a client comes to see me or is discussing their consulting with me or discussing how this works, or just for yourself? These are things that I want you to understand, that when they're out of that range, you are, those metrics are important. So it is personalized, but there is some key metrics that are kind of indicators to let someone know that there is a dysfunction. So we're going to go over them. Of course, there's lab work, there's body mechanic issues, there's blood pressure, there's markers, there's different things. So first, when an individual is trying to make changes and said, well, I don't know why things are off. So yes, there's an endocrine, your endocrine system is off, right? You're not metabolizing things. You're not doing what the body is, it's not secreting the right amount of hormones correctly. It's not doing the job properly. So it's having difficulties. How do you get those glands in that body to get back to an optimal state? Well, first, we're talking about what those metrics are, what are identifiers of that. So let's look at it like if you were to look at your body weight. So body weight generally by itself isn't an indicator, but obviously if you fluctuate weekly or you're not aware of what you're like, if you're +5 one week and then you're 10 pounds over the next week, like what's going on there? Usually if you lose weight too quickly or gain weight too quickly, that should be an indicator of something is going on. Why is that happening? What is going on? Things need to be, reset. You need to kind of ask yourself, let's take a check there. That doesn't mean that I want you to necessarily look at the scale every day, but once a week, what is going on? Now, granted, that is not the full indicator of what your body index is, but that's the first metric. So that would let me know, okay, fluctuation, overweight, underweight. Next, body composition. So what amount of body fat, lean muscle, percentage of visceral fat, and bioelectric. So I would use to test people a bioimpedance scale. I'd have them go to a DEXA scan, or initially, if I have nothing else on my availability, I would use a waist or circumference ratio with a scale. So BMI is, body mass index with the weight and height. And granted, that's not a good indicator if people have good muscle mass versus fat. But if I do a waist circumference, and that means like the waist to hip ratio. So basically for obesity and metabolic health issues, ideally you want to have it under 1 or 0.85. So let's say your waist is 30 and your waist is like 35 and your hips are 30. That is a little off, right? So when you divide 35 divided by 30, there is a disconnect there. So sometimes, usually your hips are larger, right? So usually, let's say let's go more of an even 30 by 30. So you had 30 hips and a 30 ratio, you're at 1. Now, ideally, you want your waist to be smaller. So you would be like 28 waist divided by 30 hip. That would give you like a 0.93. Recommended ratio is 0.85 for women. Most women, except for Asian and frailer like their frame could actually be, it's like 0.85 0.9 for them. And for men, it's 0.9. So when your waist circumference surpasses your hip circumference, there is actually metabolic issues have shown up. You can have more leg muscle and leg fat. So like there's those different types of shapes, like the ones that are hip shaped and the ones that are apple shaped, or, or you just have, visceral fat and all over, or adipose tissue all over. That's different. But the waist circumference will give you a pretty good indication. It's not everything, obviously, it's just part of the metrics, but think of it when you divide out what is that for you? I will definitely tell you, before I made changes in my metabolic health, my exercise, my food, needing of medications too, and GLP modifications, I was overweight, obese, and I did not have a good circumference. I do now, but I'm aware, and you should be too. See what that is for you. Go get a measuring tape and see what your waist divided by your hips. Now, if it's over 1, that's an indicator that you needs improvement. And this isn't even a weight. I'm not even looking at your weight. Your weight could actually be in the range of the proper weight, but that body fat in that donut area, they call it that donut for a reason. You probably were eating too much donuts and carbs. Now let's look at blood sugar. Obviously, blood sugar has to do with fasting glucose. So yes, numbers that I can check without doing a full big panel: A1C, fasting glucose, fasting insulin, and then also what's your sugar after a meal. So I'd have individuals go on a continuous glucose monitor for a short period of time, like a 2 to 3 month period, just to see, or even a month to see what they would be at, or just buy one of those small glucose monitors and test it. And that kind of gives me an idea, about 2 hours after your meal, what's your numbers. And so let's say fasting glucose, if it's over 100, that's not good. Preferably, actually, I'd like it between 70 to 90, 75 to 90 when you're on an average. Most individuals are 95 to 100, and they think, oh, well, I'm not diabetic yet. I'm not 120, but you're creeping up there. And more over time, your pancreas and your liver will be overworked, and they will not be able to metabolize properly, and you will have diabetes or prediabetes, and you will have insulin resistance. So these indicators, numbers 75 to 85, 75 to 90. A1C is a 3-month average of your sugar. Now everyone says it's 5.7. Honestly, the best number really with that would be like around like 5.4, 5.2 to 5.4. If you're 5.7, I'm sorry, you're pre-diabetic in my opinion. And from the research, it's like you already passed the go. If you're getting to 5.7, you still are having some trouble. Now, this does fluctuate by age. And as you're getting older, this number will creep up because, your body's getting, older, and will have some degenerative things, but you can work on your mitochondrial and your cellular regeneration and what you put in your body. So that can still be lower, and exercise and lifestyle management with that. It doesn't have to be at 5.7. So I still prefer it to be between 5.2 to 5.4. Now, postprandial blood sugar, that's anything after meals about 2 hours. Think of that like, they say around 140. Honestly, 120 would be preferred, but each individual is different. And it depends on what kind of meal you have. So that's personalized. That's a little bit different. Lipid panel. So I'm big on a cascaded lipid panel, meaning the different particles. But if I was just to look at a baseline particle lipid panel, LDLs below 100. Honestly, I would prefer it to be below 85 to 90. HDLs, they should be greater than 60. If they're in the 30 and 40 range, you're really not working out. You're not doing enough for your body's body index. And triglycerides, that has to be below 150. That has to be below 100 if it could be. Triglycerides are the biggest indicator for cardiovascular health. So if those are high, you've got some major problems, and that is very important to change and to make change. Blood pressure. So the blood pressure ranges, they say 120 over 80 is the baseline, right? I think actually if it's at 120 over 80, we're starting to get too creeped up there. You really think, depending upon your age and your time frame, if you're at 120 over 80, I think we're starting to get a little higher. If we could, under that. Because we really need to see what changes are going on in your heart and your overall metabolic health. Because if it's irregular there, that just gives you numbers, and it will creep up, and there is the other indicator of it is may not be a cardiovascular issue, but it could be an inflammatory issue. So that could be another underlying thing that's coming up. Like women with PCOS will have elevations in their blood pressure. People that have an inflammatory or autoimmune response will have. So the body's doing the blood pressure because there's something that's going on, in the body. So you want to know why. Inflammatory markers that are used that I'd like to check out are CRP. That number range, if it can stay between 1 and 3, if it's going over 3, there's a problem there. ESR generally will give you a systemic inflammation. ANE will give you a systemic inflammation. Now, granted, they're just markers. They're not necessarily the solution, but it will have a metrics of there is some inflammatory processes a lot higher than they should be, and that bucket, your inflammation bucket needs to be lowered. And what type of inflammation is it in your body? Indicators when it comes to digestive and gut health that can be used. Usually those individuals are bloated, constipated, diarrhea, discomforting and pain on the regular. Their microbiome tests would be recommended, stool testing, micronutrient testing. Sometimes these individuals will also have, if they're females, will have female inflammatory or pelvic issues. But that depends, so that needs to be tested also and checked. Sleep, of course, sleep can be an indicator. Always recommending around the 7 to 9, trying to get into the good quality sleep cycles and getting yourself into where your REM sleep cycles are. Now, for each person, that's different. But, the recommended is, 7 to 9 hours. The individuals that are trying to get into that like rapid eye movement cycle, what is that for them? The idea is we're trying to get ourselves to relax the brain. We're trying to get the muscles to reset. When we're in our stages of sleep, there are 3. So think of it like in non-REM sleep is like transitioning from waking to going to sleep, that kind of light sleep. And then you're getting into a deeper sleep where your body temperature drops, so your heart rate starts to slow down. Then you get into that deep restorative sleep where it's like slow wave sleep, and that helps with physical recovery. And that's when the growth hormones are released. So additionally, the REM sleep is when that 90 minutes after falling asleep, and that's where you're really getting your deepest sleep, and that gives you that restorative sleep. It's super important because it is an indicator of where your metabolism and your brain are functioning. It enhances the overall, like your memory, and important for, regulation of these hormones so that the endocrine system will work properly, and it releases these hormones in an optimal state. Insulin, cortisol, leptin, and ghrelin. So insulin for regulating your blood sugar, cortisol for managing your stress, leptin and ghrelin for your appetite and controlling. And how does this support you overall? It reduces your anxiety, it helps you with depression, emotional regulation. So all of that in tune will help with your weight management. And that's why it's like really important to understand, when you don't have good quality sleep and you don't feel refreshed, you get fatigued, brain fog, your concentration, and then you make poor choices the next day. So it's super, super important to understand that it's part of process, right? You need to, have good sleep. And then I talked numerous times about how importance of stress management and, how we perceive ourselves in stress and what we can do. Metric wise in this, I tell people, if your mood is high or low, what do we need to do for that? I try to introduce mindfulness, meditation practice, and breath work for individuals. Some people are writers, so maybe journaling is good. Sometimes it's just going out for a walk. Some people like to listen to music. So mindfulness is varied for each person, and this is kind of a metric for that. Now, high cortisol levels, without me even having to test someone, I kind of can know by if they're able to sleep, if they're waking up, or with the conversation that is discussed with them and see where they lie. If they're absolutely depleted, they're probably low cortisol. But if they're intermittently, it's most probably is high cortisol. And things that work for that, is lifestyle modifications and different types of adaptogens and just natural things. And then just needing further testing as needed. So on that note, if you have any other questions, reach out to me and I would be glad to help. And we'll talk on the next lesson. Have a great rest of your day and make sure it's a mindful one. Thank you for listening to the Mindfully Integrative Show with Dr. Damaris Maria Grossman, family nurse practitioner. This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and is not to substitute for professional medical advice, diagnose, or treat. Always consult your healthcare provider before making changes to your healthcare routine. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. If you enjoyed our show, please support us by leaving a mindful review on Apple Podcast or your favorite streaming platform. Interested in being a guest or more information? Email us at info@mindfullyintegrative.com. For resources mentioned in the show, visit our website at www.mindfullyintegrative.com. You can also connect mindfully with Dr. Damaris on her social media links found on the site. May your strength and peace guide you to find a mindful way every day. Namaste.